Hi, folks. Welcome to part 3 of our series on Middle East and the United States and conflict. Remember, we're looking ahead. We're doing a lot of history, but that's so that we can make plans for the future. What should we be doing now in the Middle East depends on how things have been done in the past. Who have our friends been in the past? Who have our enemies been in the past? Where have we gone to war in the past? So we got to know our past to know our future. Now, one of the things you might have noticed in parts 1 and 2 is that we're interested in oil, we're interested in our friendship with Israel, and we're interested in fighting the Soviet Union and preventing them from influencing countries in the Middle East. So it's complex. When we're talking about world events, it's complex. There's not a simple, straightforward answer. So we have to appreciate the complexity of different motives. And sometimes oil's more important, and sometimes Israel, sometimes the Soviet Union, and sometimes these things cause you to do stuff that maybe seems like it's not the best thing in hindsight, but at the time, the leaders were trying to do the best that they could. So let's get into part 3. But I'm not saying all the decisions are even all decisions are always good. I mean, there are bad decisions, so you have to evaluate those. Okay, in part 3, we're going to look at oil in Saudi Arabia. We're going to look at the war in Iraq that started in 2003, and we're going to talk about modern concerns about Iran. So the essential questions: which interests and values should provide the basis for U.S. policy in the region? How should the Middle East's enormous oil reserves and the United States' close relationship with Israel figure into policy calculations? And how do recent changes from the Arab Spring and beyond affect the U.S. relationship with countries in the region? So what about Middle Eastern oil? The Middle East has 48% of the known reserves of oil. And this graph is a little blurry, but the yellow is the Middle East, blue is North America, green is Central and South America, this red is Europe, this orange is Africa, and this red is Asia and Oceania. This is Eurasia. Sorry, so this is like Russia. And the blue is Europe, so very little oil reserves. Now, what is an oil reserve? An oil reserve is how much oil is underground. Sorry about that. So it's one thing to have some oil that you're pumping out and you're selling on the market, but it's a whole nother thing to have a huge reserve of oil underground because you know it's going to be there 20, 50, 100 years later. It's a massive reserve. So that's why the Middle Eastern oil is so important, because they have so much in reserve. This is a famous picture of George Bush, President Bush, with the Saudi leader. They're holding hands because that's a custom in Saudi culture. Men hold hands there. So we have been friends with Saudi Arabia for 60 years because they have the most oil reserves. And we're overlooking the fact that Saudi Arabia is not democratic. They have not supported women's rights. There have been links to terrorism, but we overlook a lot of stuff because of our relationship with oil. And by the way, in the past decade, they've gotten a little more democratic and they've gotten a little better on women's rights. So let's go to Iraq again. If you remember, in the 80s, they were in a war against Iran. Then they invaded Kuwait. It's the same leader. His name is Saddam Hussein. After 9/11, we're worried that Saddam is going to either have weapons of mass destruction or that he has links to international terror. By weapons of mass destruction, we mean nuclear weapons or biological and chemical weapons. So we're worried that he can launch them. Iraq had this type of missile called a Scud. It's on this mobile carrier. It can be launched hundreds and hundreds of miles. So Iraq could hit Israel if they wanted to. So we're concerned about that. And we're also concerned that they might give a suitcase bomb, nuclear material in a small container to terrorists, and the terrorists could bring that to the United States or something like that. So we go to war. We invade Iraq because we are so concerned about these things after 9/11. And we invade them in 2003. we do not have a big international coalition. In the Persian Gulf War in 1991, we had a huge international coalition and we had the UN supporting us. In 2003, we go it alone. There's a couple countries that chip in a few troops, but basically we're just on our own. We win the war pretty easily. U.S. casualties about 4,400, Iraqi 100 to 200,000. They don't know the exact amount. But we win easy because our military is so vastly superior. Our military technology and our troops are better trained and better equipped. So the main fighting in the first couple of years goes pretty well. After that, there becomes an insurgency. That's where American troops were occupying cities and people start sort of fighting in guerrilla warfare style, hiding and then fighting and then hiding and jumping out and fighting. They're not wearing uniforms. They're surprise attacking U.S. troops. So that lasts for another 5 years. The funny thing is, it's not funny at all, but we thought that there were terrorists there. But it turns out there was no weapons of mass destruction found and no link to Al-Qaeda found. So the world is pretty angry at the U.S. for using force when there was no justification. And we anger some allies, including Turkey and Saudi Arabia in the region. We end up getting less cooperation on other big issues because people are upset with us. And even though there were no terrorists before the war, terrorists end up flocking to Iraq and they end up fighting the U.S. troops that are there in this insurgency. So there's some really tough fighting as we try to help Iraq transition from the dictator Saddam Hussein to a democracy, which they have been a democracy for some time now. So we did succeed, but it was an awfully painful experience trying to get there. Okay, when Iraq is going on after 9/11, we are also concerned about Iran having nuclear weapons. This was the leader of Iran at the time. We knew Iran had large missiles. To have an effective nuclear weapon, you have to have the nuclear technology, the material, and you have to have the missile launching capability. So we could see through satellite images that we were concerned about Iran having the missile technology, and we were worried about them having the nuclear technology at all. Also, Iran claimed that they had a right to use nuclear material for energy, for power plants. And they had signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is the big international treaty. Non-proliferation means not spreading. So they signed the deal that they could use energy, nuclear material for energy purposes and not for nuclear weapons. But we did not believe them. And that issue is still going on today. So Iran also had some conflicts with Israel. You know, Israel's our good friend in the region. Iran, they had a leader for a while who was saying a lot of anti-Israeli things. And Iran sort of sends some fighters over and they fight against Israel. So there's some conflict there. A couple of things that have happened in Iran that nobody knows why, but they think maybe Israel did this. There's a big computer virus on the nuclear facilities of Iran. They think maybe Israel hacked in, or who knows, really. And there were also the assassination of some nuclear scientists in Iran. And they think maybe Iran and Israel are kind of having this little bit of a fight going on. That was like 10 years ago. Okay, so what are our interests in the region? We're getting closer to the modern times into your lifetime. We're still very interested in oil. We're still very interested in being friends with Israel. We are no longer worried about the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union has dissolved, but we are worried about terrorists in the region and them exporting terror to the United States or Europe as well, anywhere. So that is the end of part 3. If you have any questions, see me in class or shoot me an email. All right, take care.